Happy Mother's Day to you all. So this morning we are going to get right into what we have to cover because it's going to be quite a bit. I was given a whole book to preach to you in about 30 minutes. So hopefully it's only 30 minutes, but I make no promises on time today. So this morning we're going to look at the story of Esther. The story of Esther is found in the book of Esther. So first we got to answer a couple questions about the book. So the author of Esther is unknown. People have guesses, people have theories, they've done research, but there is no one for sure answer about who wrote it. Also, another fun fact about Esther, God, or even the name of God, is never once mentioned throughout the whole book of Esther. Why that is, I'm not totally sure. But I believe that the author, whoever that was, wants us to look at the details of Esther for divine appointments, for things that are out of the ordinary. And so the author wants us to see that even though it may not look like God is in the picture, he is always at work. And so the phrase that we're going to see over and over again in the book of Esther is this: God's providence always prevails. God's providence always prevails. So let's now look towards the book of Esther. The setting of this book takes place in a town called Susa. Now, Susa is not a place typically where Jewish people were typically living. So how did they get there? History tells us that in 586 BC, the Babylonians conquered the nation of Judah and they took the Jewish people into captivity. So the Jews remained there until 539 BC when the Babylonians were conquered by the Persians and their king, whose name was Cyrus. And so just 1 year after the Persians conquered the Babylonians and King Cyrus is reigning, here's what happens. We're going to look back real quick at Ezra 1 through 4. Here's what happens 1 year after that. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, the king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you or of his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is Judah. So, after they are conquered, God, again, a divine appointment, he stirs up the heart of Cyrus. The Jews are taken out of the promised land because they are being punished for their disobedience. And yet now, 1 year after this new king is in charge, his heart is stirred up, and he tells everybody to let God's people return to their home. Now, again, the events of Esther took place in Susa. So that means that all of the Jews that we're going to see in this story, in the book of Esther, they chose to stay in Susa despite their freedom. They were given freedom to return back to where they were supposed to live in the promised land in Judah, but they did not return, and they all stayed in Susa. So they had chose to be comfortable where they were in Susa rather than return to Judah. Now, real quick, let me introduce you to the four main characters of the book. These are the four main people that we're going to be talking about. First main character, his name is Mordecai. Mordecai was a servant of the king in some capacity. So we don't know for sure what his role was, but we do know that he served in the king's court, which was an area near town, near the king's palace. So he was in a downtown area serving in the palace of the king. Mordecai was a Jew, and so we know that because he's in Susa, he chose to stay in Susa. Second main character is Esther. Esther is the cousin of Mordecai. However, her parents had passed away, and so Mordecai decided to raise Esther as his own daughter. Esther also was a Jew. And then we have, and this is, we'll only just say it once, King Ahasuerus. King Ahasuerus. So from now on, if it's okay, we're going to just refer to him as King A, if that's a little easier. So King A, he was the king of over 127 provinces, and he reigned over Susa. He was the king at the time. And the last main character, his name is Haman. He was on King A's presidential cabinet in some capacity, and he served him directly in the king's quarters. So Mordecai, Esther, King A, and Haman. So after all that, let's finally open up to the book of Esther, chapter 1. Now, in the days of King A, who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, in those days when King A sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants, the army of Persia, the Media, the nobles, the governors of the provinces were all before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days. This party lasted 180 days, and when those days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, both great and small, another feast lasting for another 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King A. Queen Vashti, Queen V, is King A's wife. She's obviously the queen. And so what's happening here is King A throws a massive party. So this party lasts 180 days long, and no expenses were spared. We're talking anything you could think of, they had an excess, they could get refills, 180-day party. And then after that, he says, hey, now I'm going to throw an after party. And so he throws another 7-day party or feast. And the whole reason that King A was throwing this, there was not some event, there was not some celebration. This dude was strictly just trying to flex on everybody, right? He was trying to show off his wealth. He was trying to show how awesome he is, how much his palace was so beautiful and all the resources he had. His main goal was trying to flex on all the people in Susa. And so after that, during the 7th day of the second party, the after party, the Bible says, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded one of his servants, who served in the presence of King A, to bring Queen V before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the people and the princes her beauty. For she was lovely to look at. But Queen V refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. At this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. So they are now at the after party, the 7-day after party, and he says, you know what, guys? I want to flex on you even more. Let me get my wife, right? Again, no point of celebration. He basically just says, I want you all to look at my wife and be jealous. So he sends one of his servants to go get Queen V. Again, there's 2 separate banquets, one for the men, one for the women. So he sends his servant to the women's banquet, and he says, hey, Queen V, he's asking for you. He wants you to show off for all of the people. And she says, nuh-uh, I'm not doing that. She knows that all he is trying to do is to show off and to flex on all these people. And so she says, no, I'm not going to this banquet. I'm not going to be this trophy or this prize that you're going to show off. And so what happens after that, King A is furious. So he gets together all of his little buddies, all his fellow princes and government leaders, all that. He gets together a little pity party. And these guys are pretty much just going at it about how could she possibly say no to the king, right? Well, what is she thinking saying no to the king? Like, you're the queen. You're supposed to be this person of nobility and all this, and you can't even show up? And then they get to this right here, verse 17 in chapter 1. This is the thing that they are most offended by. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt. Since they will say, King A commanded Queen V to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day the noble women of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath and plenty. So they are whining, they are complaining, they are crying, and they get to the point where they say, if the public knows that Queen V said no to King A, what are all the other wives going to do? They're going to say no to their husbands. They're going to say no to us as the king's leaders. Well, that can't happen. And so what they decide to do, he is so mad, King A, he sends out a decree banishing Queen V forever from the kingdom. So she is no longer the queen. She is banished because of this decree. Now, Here's something that's important that we're going to have to remember later on. A king's decree cannot be reversed. All right? We're going to keep that in mind. A king's decree cannot be reversed. So he sends out a decree banishing the queen from his existence, from the kingdom. And again, that cannot be reversed. Now, here's the problem. In chapter 2, we see a little bit different of an emotion from King A. It says, after these things, when the anger of King A had left him, he had remembered Queen V and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. So, King A is feeling a little lonely, right? He kicked her out. He has no wife anymore, and so he is getting a little lonely. But, again, a king's decree cannot be reversed, so he can't just say, hey, come back, I'm sorry for what I did, you're welcome back into my kingdom. He cannot do that. And so what happens is, this is right here in Esther chapter 2, the first ever season of The Bachelor. All right? Maybe you're familiar with that or you've watched it before. This is literally the first ever season of The Bachelor. So what they do, all of his little buddies decide, hey, here's what we should do. Here's how we can get a new queen. We're going to send out a letter, a flyer to all the people in all 127 provinces that you're over. And we're going to tell them to send their best women to come compete to be the queen. So it is quite literally a season of The Bachelor. And so this is where we first get introduced to Esther. Now, the first important thing about Esther is that up until the very end of this book, nobody knows that Esther is a Jew. Okay? Nobody is aware of her ethnicity. They are not aware that she is a Jew or that she is here because of the captivity. So nobody knows that Esther was a Jew. And so here is the first thing that we see about Esther in her book. Esther, the woman, had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. So, as the kids would say, Esther was bad, right? She was hot. She was smoking, whatever word that you use in your time. That is Esther. She is an attractive woman. She is pleasing to look at. She has a beautiful figure. And so, because of that, she is already beginning to win favor among the people within the king's palace. So there was a man who was basically in charge of preparing all the women to look beautiful, to get them, coached well on how to stand and what to do. And so it says, the young woman pleased him, the man who was in charge, and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetic and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and had advanced her and her young women to the place in the harem. So she is already, without even having to do anything, a favorite. Again, let's think about The Bachelor. On night 1 when they give away the first rose, whoever gets that, she got the first rose. All right? She was the standout. She stood out among all the people. She gets this first rose, and so she is the front runner for the future queen. And so what's happening here is the young women, basically, they have a chance to go in front of the king and impress him, and they can ask for whatever they want to take to go and try to impress him. So, maybe they can juggle. They're going to take, some balls, and they're going to juggle for him. Maybe they do stand-up comedy. They're going to ask for a microphone and go give their stand-up comedian bit, right? Whatever it is that is their special talent or their thing that they're known for or makes them stand out, they can ask for that thing. And when they go try to win the heart of the king, they can take whatever they want. Now, here's the thing. The turn came for Esther, and this is verse 15 of chapter 2. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter or the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So she decides to take nothing into the presence of the king. She just takes herself, and so she is a standout because of that. Maybe it was because of her beauty. Maybe it was because she was being so humble. Whatever that looked like, she stood out because she did not, like the rest, take some extravagant trick or something that they could please the king with. She took nothing with her. And so it says, the king loved Esther more than all the women. And so he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave her a great feast for all the officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. So the queen basically wins the bachelor from beauty alone, doesn't impress the king with her words or some kind of action. She wins the bachelor on beauty alone. She is now the queen. And again, still think, nobody knows that she is a Jew. And so then we see for the first time Mordecai. Again, Mordecai was Esther's cousin, but was raising her as his own. And so here we see Mordecai. Again, he works for the king. He works in the court of the king. And so here's what's happening with him. As Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, he saw or overheard two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, and they became angry and sought to lay hands on King A. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So this feels a little random and out of place at the moment, but we're going to hang on to that. So what's happening? Mordecai is working in the presence, in the court of the king. He overhears two eunuchs planning to kill the king. They are both angry at him, and they are planning to kill the king. And so what he does, he goes and he tells Esther, hey, I overheard these two people. They are trying to kill the king. Will you tell the king? And so Esther goes and tells the king of the plot, and she makes sure to give credit to Mordecai because he's the one that overheard them. And it turns out to be true. They are trying to plot to kill the king, and so they end up being hung on the gallows. And so after all of that, we are now introduced to Haman. And so again, Haman at this point, he is getting promoted to the second in command to the king. So he already was on the presidential cabinet, but now he's being promoted to second in command to the king. So he is getting a promotion. And so what's happening is he wants to be praised by all the people around him. And so we'll pick up in chapter 3, verse 2. It says, and all the king's servants who were at the king's gates bowed down to him, to Haman, and they paid homage to him. For the king had so commanded concerning him, but Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Now, how many of you have ever been snubbed for a promotion at work, and then you have to go say congrats to the person that did get the promotion? Okay, that's exactly what's going on here. So Mordecai, he's faithful, he's serving. He sees Haman get a promotion, and as Haman is walking by, everyone's praising him, and Mordecai just sits there and did not bow and did not pay homage. And so, as you could imagine, this upset Haman. And verse 5 says, and when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy, which was all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of King A. So Haman is so mad that Mordecai isn't acknowledging him that he says, you know what? I don't want to punish you, Mordecai. I want to punish all your people. I want to punish all the Jewish people because you didn't bow down to me. That's how mad he is. And so we see right after that, they start casting pur, which is the Hebrew word for dice. They are casting dice, basically trying to decide when the month and the day is that they're going to kill all the Jews. They're rolling dice, and whatever happens, that's the day they're going to pick to execute all of the Jews. And so they decide month after month, they cast until it is the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. And then here's what happens. Haman said to the king, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to be the king's profit to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, all the Jewish people, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the enemy of the Jews. So Haman goes even farther and says, hey, King A, I have this plan. I want to kill all the Jews, and if you let me do it, I'm going to pay you 10,000 talents of silver. Now, how much is that today? You would think it's a good amount of money, right? If this guy is so mad, he wants to pay the king to get permission to kill all these people. Here's the amount of money it is equated today. He said, I'm going to pay $393 million to kill all the Jews. That's how mad he was. Listen, I've been mad at people, but not $393 million mad at people before. I don't know about you. And so Haman is so upset, that's what he's going to do. And so after that, he gets permission from the king, and a decree, which is not reversible, is written so that he may pick the day from the dice. And the king's decree says all the Jews will be killed on this day. Again, it is a decree from the king which cannot be reversed. And so now we get to the point where Mordecai finally learns the plan of Haman. And so it says, chapter 4, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. So he finds out that he, impartial, is responsible for the fact that all the Jews are going to die. And so he goes throughout the city, ripping his clothes. He is mourning, he is crying, he is sad because of what's going to happen. And so Esther and her servants notice that Mordecai is moping around town. And so they send him garments to try to clothe him. And he says, no, I will not accept them. And then Esther called for one of her servants and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn why it was that he was so sad. Esther did not know that this decree had been passed. And so she sends one of her servants to go talk to Mordecai to find out why he is mourning so much. And so Mordecai told the servant all that had happened to him. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. Go to Mordecai and say this, and this is where we get Esther the Diva, right? That is her nickname, Esther the Diva. This is where it comes from. Esther says, go back to Mordecai and say this. She's just made known that there's a plan to kill her people, to kill all the Jews, to kill her cousin. And here's what she says. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king's court for these 30 days. Nobody was allowed in the presence of the king unless they were invited. Even his own wife was not allowed. She knows that, and she knows that if she just shows up in his palace, she is more than likely going to get killed because she was not welcomed in there. So why is she a diva? Think about it. At this point, Esther was queen. She had new jewelry. She had new makeup. She had a new hairdo. She had a new TV, right? She had all the things she could possibly hope for, even though she was an orphan not too long ago. And she's going to have to give all of that up to go try and talk to the king. So why is she a diva? It's because she selfishly does not want to give up the comfort that she has. Again, she didn't necessarily earn the comfort. She didn't work for it. She won a competition. But she was being a diva in the fact that she refused to give up this comfort that she now had. And so Mordecai replies to Esther, angry, and he says, "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this," is what he says. Perhaps you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And so we want to talk about God's timing. This right here is God's perfect timing. God's providence always prevails. And so he says, Mordecai says to Esther, this is the reason you've been put here, to save God's people. For such a time as this, you're the one that's going to save God's people. And so, question real quick for you is, what is a time such as this for you, right? We'll talk about that more later, but for such a time as this is what he says. And then Esther replied to Mordecai, "Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa. Hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I am the young woman, will also fast as you do." And she says this, and this is a huge attitude change. From being a diva and not wanting to give up comfort, she says this, "I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." She recognizes that this is God's plan. This is what he wants her to do, that she is here for such a time as this. And so she goes from being a diva and saying, "I'm not doing that," right? God decided it was not too late for her, and she now has an attitude change and says, if I perish, I perish. But at least I did what God was asking me to do. And so here's what she does. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robe. She stood in the inner court of the king's palace. So she puts on the best dress, the best makeup, the perfume you can smell from across the room, and she just kind of goes and stands near the king's presence. Not necessarily enter. She's just kind of standing there. She's probably twirling her hair, winking at him. And so King A looks up, and when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. And King A said to her, "She hasn't asked for anything." And here's what he says, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to the half of my kingdom." He is offering her half of his kingdom, and she's not asked for anything, right? There's an old song from when I was in high school, "You can have whatever you like," Some of you young people know what I'm talking about. That's what he's telling her. You can have whatever you want, Esther. I don't care what it is. If it's half my kingdom, you can have it. And again, she's not asked for anything of him. And so here's what she says. Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." So she is preparing a banquet for the king and for Haman. And so they immediately go to the banquet. Esther, King A, and Haman are at the banquet. And the king said to Esther again now, "What is your wish? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." And Esther answered, "My wish and my request is that if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to another feast that I will prepare for them tomorrow, and I will do as the king has said." So she now says, tomorrow I'm going to throw another banquet, and I want you to come to that as well. And so now we see a bit of a boiling point between Haman and Mordecai. So Haman went out that day. He left this banquet joyful, glad of heart, but then he saw Haman in the king's gate, and Mordecai, neither rose nor trembled before him, and he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. So at this point, I think Mordecai might have known what he was doing, right? He knows there's a plan that works. He knows that God is starting to work. And so he is approached by Haman. Haman's walking past Mordecai. And you know that look that sometimes people give you, and it's just like, it's snarky and it's a little snotty, and they're trying to make you mad. That's the look that Haman gets from Mordecai. Just that, like, whatever that looks like, that little smirk. And so Haman is furious at this point because Haman is still not being acknowledged by Mordecai. And so, again, similar to what we saw King A do, what does Haman do? Haman also throws a pity party for himself. So Haman invites his friends over to his house. His wife is there at his house. And at this point, he is just crying like, I'm second in command to the king. I have the second nicest house. I have this crown, and he won't acknowledge me. He is truly, at this point, crying and pouting because all that he has, and yet Mordecai will not acknowledge him. So Haman said, even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast that she prepared. So now he's just throwing everything in there. I was at the banquet that only the king was invited to, and yet Mordecai won't acknowledge me. And so here's what, and he says, tomorrow I am also invited to another banquet. Yet this is worth nothing to me so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. He cannot get over the fact that Mordecai would not acknowledge him. He's listing all these good things that are going on for him, and yet he's stuck on the fact that Mordecai refuses to acknowledge him. And then his wife, Zeresh, Haman's wife, and all his friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. This idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. So, hung at the gallows, typically, it's not what we're thinking of. So, in this time, what it means by hung at the gallows, he was going to build a 50-cubit high gallows. That's roughly 75 feet tall today. And just think of it as a wooden stick with the point at the end. A 75-foot stick with the point at the end is what he was going to build. And just, they're pushed off a platform onto this stake, okay? That's the execution that he is talking about. So that's what he is so mad. His wife tells him, go build a 75-foot stake in the ground that you can throw Mordecai on tomorrow morning. That's his plan to address the fact that he is mad at Mordecai. Now, this next part, I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but we'll see. It says, chapter 6, on that night, the king could not sleep. That's probably happened to you. And so the king gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the chronicles, and they were read before the king. So, in other words, there is some written book of all the king's accomplishments, of all the things that people have done for the king, all the good things. And so he can't sleep, and he says, servant, come here and start reading my book to me, right? It's not a storybook. It's literally his accomplishments and his stories. I normally take melatonin, but this guy decides, well, I want my story to be read to myself. And so, if you remember, at the very beginning, Mordecai found out that there was two men who were trying to kill the king, and he told Esther, who told King A, and then he was given, we thought, some reward. And so here's what it says. It was found written how Mordecai had told about the two eunuchs who guarded the threshold, who sought to lay hands on King A. And the king said, what honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And they replied, nothing has been done for him. And so the king said, who is in the court? Now, Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak with the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So Haman is in the king's court. He is on his way to ask for permission to hang Mordecai on the gallows from King A. Okay? King A recognizes that. He says, hey, come here, Haman. I have a question for you. And the king said to him, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? And listen, if you don't think God is a little funny or has a sense of humor, just wait in 1 second, okay? So he asked Haman, King A asked Haman, what should I do for somebody that the king wishes to shower with love? And so Haman said to the king, well, I think he's talking about me, right? Haman thinks that the king is trying to delight him. And so Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So, King A asks Haman, what should I do for someone I delight to honor? Haman thinks he's asking about him, and so he gives this grand gesture, this big plan, and then here's, again, if you don't think God has a sense of humor, here's what King A says to Haman. The king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate, and leave out nothing that you have mentioned. So, he has just listed this grand gesture, and he is told right away, he is humbled, okay, go do that for Mordecai. The guy you're trying to hang, the guy you hate, the guy that won't acknowledge you, all that you just said, go do that to him. And he specifically says, leave out nothing that you have mentioned. And so Haman goes out and does all that for Mordecai. And then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house. He is mourning, and he had his head covered. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. Now, there is no specific mention of God in that verse, but we can conclude here that she knows the Jews are God's chosen people and that nobody can mess with the Jews. She has seen over and over again God's provision for them. People somehow get defeated even though they're not supposed to. And she finally realizes, it clicks, if this Mordecai is really a Jew, you're not going to win this battle. You're out of luck in this whole situation. And so it's the next day. Esther's throwing another banquet. And so they're here. It's King A, it's Haman, it's Esther. And the king once again said to Esther, what is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. Finally, Queen Esther answers the question. She doesn't offer up another banquet. She answers the question, and she says, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be granted to me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss of the king. Then King A said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who has dared to do this? And Esther said, a foe, an enemy, it's Haman. They're all sitting at this table, and she says, Haman is the one, he's right here, who is trying to kill all my people. And it says, then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. So at this point, the king is so furious, he walks away. He's trying to get a breath of fresh air. He's taken his mind off of it for a second, and he returns to the room to what he thinks is Haman trying to assault Esther. Now, it does not happen for sure, but just from the way things are looking, it looks like Haman is trying to assault Esther. Now, he's actually just begging, like on his knees for permission and just trying to like be close to her and ask. But what King A sees is what he thinks is Haman trying to assault Queen Esther. He says, will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? As the word left the mouth of the king, and they covered Haman's face. And here's another sense of humor. And then a man named Harbona, one of the church's eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high. So this, talk about snitch, right? This king's servant all of a sudden shows up in the room, and he's like, by the way, king, he already built a 75-foot cubit that he was going to hang Mordecai on, and it's at his house right now. Just so you know, right? And the king said, hang him on that. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And then the wrath of the king was pleased. Talk about a plot twist here. Haman thinks he's all big and bad and in control, and now he has just been killed on the device he built to kill somebody else. Now, at this point, you would think that the Jews are safe, right? You would think that the story's over, everything is right. No, because a king's decree cannot be reversed. So there was already a decree put in place that on this day, chosen by the dice, all the people could execute the Jews. That was already put into place. And so Esther says, if it pleases the king and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king and I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. So she says, hey, king, just reverse your decree. Just like say it's not valid anymore. But a king's decree cannot be reversed. So King A said to the queen and to Mordecai, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict was written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring, and that cannot be revoked. This decree said that the king allows the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force or any people in any province who might attack them, children and women included, to plunder their goods. So the way they fight this battle is they send out a decree that says on this same day that Jews are supposed to be executed, every Jew is allowed to fight back by order of the king. They are allowed to fight back. And so, chapter 9, the Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces of King A to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could stand against them. For the fear of them had fallen on all people. All the officials of the provinces and the governors and the royal agents also helped the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai had fallen on them. And so after all this destruction, Esther said, if it pleases the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow also to do this according to today's edict. And here's what she says, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hung on the gallows as well. And the king commanded this to be done. And here is where God's providence, God's faithfulness to us, the end of chapter 9 says, and Mordecai recorded these things, and he sent letters to all the Jews, commanding them to keep the 14th day of the month, and also the 15th day of the same year by year. They were to do this, so the Jews, they accepted that. They started to do that exactly what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and he had cast the dice, to crush and to destroy them. Therefore, they called these days of celebration Purim, after the term Pur. So they now have a yearly celebration of the dice that were once rolled to decide their fate. And now it's twisted by God to be something that is they can rejoice in, that they can have freedom in. And so all of that is written. The command of Esther confirmed these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in the writing. And as for Mordecai, it says, for Mordecai, the Jews, he was second in rank to the king. He was great among the Jews, and he was popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of the people, and he spoke to people all in his place. God's providence always prevails. I'm not sure if everybody knows, but originally, me and Hannah did not plan on being here at all. We graduated in 2020 from Oklahoma Baptist. We had big plans to go to North Carolina, to go to seminary, and we had some friends going out there, and we knew some professors out there, and we had this big plan to do all that. And all of a sudden, something you may know called COVID decided to show up. And so obviously, we couldn't get jobs. We didn't know if School was just going to be online. Everything that we had once planned was just torn down. And so we ended up maybe a little hesitantly just coming to live here where we had some family and we could live in a house. And so we decided to stay here. Now, I promise you, even though that was not our plan, everything that we have needed, God has given us over the past 5 years. Every single thing. Sometimes we couldn't even explain it, but he has given us everything that we have needed because we were faithful to just do what he said, even though it wasn't what we had planned. So over the past 5 years, I have learned to trust in the providence of God. I have seen him work. I have seen him move. I have seen him twist situations for his good. I have learned to trust in his providence. But what about you? Have you learned that yet? Do you see how God has been working in the events of your life? God can work in, out, through, and around any situation for good and for his glory. But God blesses us so that we can then become a blessing to others. God gave Esther favor wherever she went, not so that she would have favor and be popular, but that so through her, God could defend his people. And if we get with God's program, he can use us and he will work all things out for his glory. We have to realize that God has placed us where we are. He has allowed us to go through what we have gone through, all the good, all the bad. He allows this so that we can be a blessing to others and bring glory to him in the process. God is always at work behind the scenes, and he is using our lives to bring glory to him. And so with every head bowed, every eye closed, I just have a couple questions for you. What position does God have you in for such a time as this? Whatever that circumstance, maybe it's a job, a move, a relationship. What position does God have you in for such a time as this, where it looks like it's nothing but the worst, but just after a few moments, he's going to work it all together? Second question, what talent or abilities or passion has God given you for such a time as this? We joked about how beautiful Esther was, but she was given that so that she could be chosen by the king, so that she could have favor among the people, so that King A could offer her half the kingdom, and she could ask in return to save her people. So what talents, abilities, or passion has God given you for such a time as this? Can you think of maybe a coincidence or a mistake that God has used to accomplish his will in your life? If we had to summarize the whole point of today, it's pretty simple. It's 2 words: trust God. Trust God. Trust that he will work events in your life. No matter how good, no matter how bad, he works it all together into a beautiful tapestry. Trust in the providence of God, because God's providence always prevails. Let's pray. Father God, we are so grateful to you, Father. Whether we're confused or whether we're set in our ways, we know that you are working in our lives, Father. You are working in us. You are working through us, Father, to accomplish your goals. You have given us gifts and abilities and talents, not to give ourselves praise, but so that you may have praise. Father, and we thank you for all of that. We thank you for your providence. We thank you for working in our lives in ways that we can never understand, in ways that we often can't explain. And the explanation is simple. It's you, Father. It's your work. And so we pray for anybody in here who maybe is approaching a time where they have to make that difficult decision. Father, do I leave my comfort? Do I do what's uncomfortable? Do I choose to be bold? Or do I just sit back and enjoy the comfort that I have in my life? Father, like we said, you are blessing us so that we can bless others. You don't bless us so that we can build ourselves a kingdom or build ourselves statues or have fame among all the people. Father, you bless us so that we can bring glory to you. And we pray, just like Mordecai told Esther, Father, Maybe something is happening in our lives right now for such a time as this. We pray that you would reveal that to us, that you would show that to us, how you are working in our lives each and every day. We pray all this in your name. Amen.